starting everyone who has a manic episode or something that's considered to be bipolar or manic depression on long-term drug treatment is in the end leading to more episodes, to people having more episodes and more chronic conditions, because we know that then if people try and come off medication, it will lead, it will increase their risk of having an episode.
But I think the system that they are being brought up in is creating a problem for them in their approach, because I didn't know that, 50, 60, 70 years ago, that the outcomes, number one, that the number of people being diagnosed with bipolar was so significantly, so much significantly smaller, and that the outcomes were quite positive. Most people didn't experience bipolar disorder for the rest of their lives. They, they might have had a few episodes and then it would self-resolve if left to its own devices. I didn't know that.
Yes.
And we have created, iatrogenically, we've created these chronic conditions that people become dependent on medication, and then their quality of life deteriorates significantly over their lifetime, because you can't isolate where that is going to affect you. And so people end up with cardiovascular issues, and they end up with, destroying their kidneys. I remember having to go in for regular liver function tests when I was on Depakote. And every time I did it, I would cry, because I don't drink alcohol. Like, I'm very careful with my body. I'm very healthy with the way that I eat. And I was taking something that I knew was destroying my liver, and so what do we do about this? That's one of the things that you feel like a tiny voice in a humongous ocean. How do we change things? What do we do going forward? How do we help people?
That's a good question. I'll try and come to that. But first of all, your point about this idea that you've been fed that these drugs are reverse, like insulin, are doing something natural. They're replenishing some natural deficiency, so they're good for you. I mean, that idea was very deliberately put into people's minds. It was very deliberate to make people think that these drugs were good for the body, doing something natural, a bit like insulin, in order to divert people's attention away from the fact that these are foreign chemicals, which, to put it, as nicely and blandly as possible, change the brain in ways that we do not fully understand. And, messing about with the brain isn't usually a good idea, and can lead to trouble. So, it was very, I think that whole focus on insulin and chemical imbalances, rectifying chemical imbalances, was a very deliberate effort to try and portray drugs that are potentially doing harmful things to the brain in an overly rosy and unjustifiably rosy light.
Yeah.
And then your point about creating chronicity. So I explained that, when you come off lithium, you're more likely to have a relapse than you were before you started it. So I think that it's possible that starting everyone who has a manic episode or something that's considered to be bipolar or manic depression on long-term drug treatment is in the end leading to more episodes, to people having more episodes and more chronic conditions, because we know that then if people try and come off medication, it will lead, it will increase their risk of having an episode. And there does seem to be some evidence going back a few decades that there were quite a few people, I don't know exactly what proportion, but more than I think we would think nowadays, who had just 1 or 2 or 3 episodes and then seemed to be fine, either for the rest of their lives or certainly for long periods of time. So I do think that we have possibly created, made the whole condition worse by by putting people on long-term medication that people will inevitably stop at some point because it's not very nice. And then they, have a withdrawal-induced relapse.
Yeah. So,
and then
yeah,
what do we do about we do about this problem?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to inform people, that the way that drugs have been presented to, the drug treatment has been presented to them is not backed up by evidence, that there's a completely different way of thinking about drugs, which really changes our relationship with them. Doesn't necessarily mean we should never use them, but changes our relationship with them fundamentally. So that people can make better informed decisions. And I do think, in this day and age of the internet, and, we're just so much more connected that it's easier to get that message out there and across to people than it ever was before. But having said that, there are still people who don't want people to hear it. And I experienced that after publishing the serotonin paper. Lots of experts came out trying to reassure people that, it wasn't important, didn't change anything. Don't worry, antidepressants, they do something biological, even if we don't know exactly what it is. And basically, it seemed to me that they were trying hard to stop people from hearing that actually there was another way of thinking about this medication and what it does to people.